Earning a living isn't easy, and history has shown it never has been. Those who were rich got to spend their life in a lap of luxury. For those who were poor, making a living was not only difficult, but often dangerous as well. You'll be surprised to find some of the worst jobs people had in the past, from working with poop to eating food off of dead people. In today's video, let's take a look at some of the worst jobs in history that'll make you appreciate your current job a little more. Number 10. Sin eaters. The Middle Ages were a hard time to live in. People did all sorts of things to survive, but perhaps the most bizarre job one could ever do was sin eating. You'd be horrified to know it's exactly what it sounds like. Sin eating has a very rusty origin, but it was particularly popular in Scotland, Wales, and England. People believed that if someone else took the sins of a dead person, their chances of entering heaven would increase. This religious obsession with cleansing gave birth to the job of sin eaters. A sin eater's job was to eat food off dead individuals to cleanse their sins. Another belief was that bread worked like a sponge to soak up a person's sins. So families would normally arrange a ritual where they kept pieces of bread on top of a sick individual to let sin eaters eat the bread and transfer all the person's sin out of the body. It may sound weird to us, but it probably made a lot of sense to people in the Middle Ages. You would think the person would at least be paid well for being the scapegoat for the family. Not really. Sin eaters made just a half a shilling for their job, which is equivalent to a few dollars per meal. Sin eaters were also known to be very lonely people because of the nature of their job, causing them to be social outcasts. Who would have known? People believed that with every job sin eaters took, their souls became more tainted and their sins were contagious to those around them, so people would actively avoid them unless they needed them for a ritual. Number 9. Gong farming. If it's farming, it can't be that bad, right? But it isn't just any farming, it's poop farming. People in medieval times used outdoor toilets for their daily business, and because plumbing wasn't a thing back then, all the poop would collect in a pit below the toilet. When these cesspits would fill up, the gong farmer's job was to empty them. After collecting the waste, they would trash it into large dump sites outside the cities, where farmers would use it as fertilizers. Baths were a luxury reserved only for the rich people, so these gong farmers smelled disgusting all the time. On the bright side, they were paid a very high salary. A day's worth of salary for gong farmers was equivalent to what other workers earned in a week. Number 8. Chimney sweepers. If you had a fireplace in the Victorian era, you would ultimately need a chimney sweeper. But what if we told you that your chimney sweeper wasn't a man, but a 6-year-old child? You'd be enraged by the idea. But during the Victorian era, it was really common for little boys to be employed for this particular job. This was because an adult male's physique was just too broad to fit into the narrow structure of a chimney, so businesses would hire young boys from the ages of 4 to 6 to do the job for them. Their petite bodies allowed them easy access to all the parts of the chimney, which made them perfect for the job. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Children often got stuck inside these chimneys if they were too narrow. Cleaning chimneys also posed constant health risks due to soot and smoke, which led to future respiratory problems. These hardworking children were always overworked and often unpaid because the majority of them were orphans or were bought off from poor parents. Mechanical chimney sweepers were developed in 1803, but it wasn't until 1875 when the government finally banned children from working in this dangerous occupation. Number 7. Rat catchers. In the medieval times, rats were despised by society because they were the main carriers of a deadly disease like the Black Plague. These rodents often threatened the food supplies of families, so people in the medieval times hired professional rat catchers to deal with them. Every rat catcher had a different approach for their job. Some rat catchers in France used cats, while others used rat traps, but the most popular method was using their hands. Rat catchers go to some of the dirtiest places, but that isn't the most disgusting part of their job. The worst part of their jobs involved handling potential disease-ridden rats. These diseased rats ended up being responsible for many deaths of rat catchers. Talk about a tough job. Number 6. Match girls. Back in the day, there were many dangerous jobs, but nothing was more horrifying than being a match girl in a factory. Match girls were mostly adolescent girls between the ages of 13 and 16. Their job was to dip the tip of matches into a white phosphorus solution known to make matches easier to light. But the problem was, white phosphorus is extremely toxic and dangerous to humans. With no regard to safety, these girls were exposed to the poisonous vapor in a poorly ventilated factory every day for 14 hours. Due to the deadly exposure, a disease named Phossy Jaw began spreading among workers. The deadly disease caused workers in match factories to have severe swelling in their mouths, leading to facial disfigurement and sometimes fatal brain damage. In addition, the gums would develop an eerie greenish-white glow in the dark. Now that's a disease you don't want to catch. Number 5. Leech collectors. Leeches were in high demand in the early 19th century. They were used to treat a range of medical conditions by slowly sucking bad blood out of patients. This method of bloodletting led to the growth of the leech trade. Leech collectors were typically women from poor backgrounds. These women walked barefooted into muddy areas and ponds to catch leeches by using their legs as bait. They would let leeches suck on their blood for at least 20 minutes before they pulled them off. Apparently, it was easier to dislodge the leeches when they got fat and were filled with blood. These women would often suffer from blood loss and serious infections due to their wounds. This practice is still used today in some parts of the world, but leeches these days are typically farmed, not collected, so no more blood sacrifices needed. Number 4. Plague barrier. During the Black Death Plague, the body count reached as many as 200 million, and the streets were littered with abandoned bodies. Someone had to clean it up, and that's when plague barriers were hired. A plague barrier's job was to collect all the bodies in their cart and take them to the mass burial sites. This job was extremely dangerous, as the bubonic plague was highly contagious and had a 100% mortality rate. The barriers were well aware of the risks, but they still choose to work day and night in return for a hefty paycheck. Number 3. Resurrectionist. Resurrectionists were people that were employed by autonomists during the 18th and 19th century. Their job was to dig up a recent grave, steal the body, and deliver it to the person who hired them. The autonomist would cut open the body and study the organs in the name of science. Charles Dickens' famous story, A Tale of Two Cities, also mentioned a father and son duo who worked as a resurrectionist. The occupation disappeared in the 19th century when the government declared stealing corpses would be punishable by death. Number 2. Groom of the Stool. A royal version of the Gong farmers, the groom of the stool is a person hired to serve the king. They are one of the king's most intimate courtiers who are responsible for the king's hygiene. It may sound fancy, but all they do is carry around the king's toilet and other essentials at all times. Their job is to monitor the king's bowel movement and check their stool for any signs of sickness. This role was created during the reign of King Henry VIII and was actually considered a very prestigious job. The more intimate you are with the king, the more you'd be respected. So sons from wealthy families would compete for this job in hopes of building connections with the king. Well, you can count me out of that. Number 1. Whipping boy. Have you ever been punished for something you didn't do? The whipping boy was a young child who basically grew up by the prince's side as his closest companion, but it wasn't with the purpose of building a lasting relationship. The whipping boy was a scapegoat who would take on any punishment that was meant for the prince. People believed that only a king could punish a prince, so every time the prince did something punishable, his companion was whipped in front of him. The whipping boy would often end up with a respectful title in the royal court thanks to his close relationship with the king. But we are still not sure if it's worth it. What do you think? That was it for today, guys. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. Which one of the jobs above did you feel was most disgusting? Would you be willing to do any of them? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you next time.